is a nightmare. Man, that's the way it seems. Life is a nightmare.
Welcome to Today in Horrible History, your daily moment of historical misfortune. For February 11th, 2022, we head back to February 11th, 1963. On that date, American poet and author Sylvia Plath made the best business move of her literary career by ending her life. The following is a pointless tale of vapid nihilism among people with too many advantages who keep chucking it all away. I'm bored with these people's lives already, but if I had to learn these details, I'm damn well going to make you sit through them too. Because this is 2022, I have to give you a trigger warning that we're going to talk about suicide in this video, unlike most of the videos in which we usually talk about axe murders and maiming and nuclear weapons accidents, psychologically healthy stuff in which people harm others but not necessarily themselves. So consider yourself warned. I'll also note all of the following events actually happened as unlikely as they seem. Sylvia Plath was born to German and Austrian immigrant parents in Massachusetts in 1932. The name should actually be pronounced Plot, but we're in the USA and we change immigrants' names. Her father Otto was a biology professor at Boston University, specializing in entomology, specifically bees. He believed his untreated advanced diabetes to be lung cancer, why not, and died of it in 1940 when Sylvia was 8. What doesn't make much sense is that he also seems to have left what he thought was lung cancer untreated. It's inexplicable. If only he knew someone versed in biology. Plath attended the finest schools and eventually prestigious Smith College, one of the snooty, originally all-female Seven Sisters colleges, and the remaining one which only admits women to this day. She excelled in school and is believed to have had an IQ as high as 160. This left Sylvia unfulfilled. Beginning in college, if not earlier, Sylvia suffered bouts of depression and began cutting her legs as a test to see if she could muster the courage to kill herself. In 1953, she established her goth and emo cred long before you posers did by overdosing on sleeping pills underneath her widowed mother's porch. She recovered and spent some time in our awful backward 1950s mental hospitals where unhelpful treatments like electroshock therapy and insulin injections, as if that would help, were administered. After winning some notice with the publication of a number of her short stories and poems, she was awarded a position as a guest editor of Mademoiselle magazine. This was an opportunity to be a young, single, free professional woman working in Manhattan publishing at a ridiculously young age and at a time when most women were expected to shut up and crank out some kids. Everything was coming up Sylvia, and this was deeply unsatisfying to Sylvia. She was prescribed the most common antidepressant at the time and spent a good deal of her short life on and off various pills. A lifelong poetry fan, she struck up a correspondence with British author and poet Ted Hughes, whose work she especially liked. Hughes is usually on the list of the finest British writers of the 20th century, and Sylvia's life being a chore, she, of course, immediately met him at a London literary party, and the two quickly married. This, of course, was also unfulfilling to Sylvia. She apparently did not tell Ted of her history of mental illness. In the coming years, after having had 2 children with Ted, which she found unfulfilling, she suffered from an apparent postpartum depression, although I'm not sure how anyone would draw a line between one variety of her depressions and the following one. The couple were offered university teaching positions in Massachusetts, and it seems they could pretty much pick any writing or university teaching career they wished on either side of the Atlantic. Sylvia found this unfulfilling. In many of her poems and later published letters, she accused her husband of physical abuse. She also accused her late father in her famed poem, Daddy, of being a quote-unquote fascist who oppressed her like a Jew. This seems a tad unfair considering Otto left Germany in 1900 at the age of 15 and was a bee professor who died in the States in 1940. It's also high irony that she would pretend to be just like an oppressed Jewish woman, and that her husband Ted, who just got the wife and mother of his children he wanted in his charmed literary life, decided to throw all of that away by beginning an affair with the poet Assia Wevel, an actual German Jewish woman whose family actually did have to flee the Nazis. Hughes doesn't seem to have made any effort to hide the affair and seems to have been a real general ass towards Sylvia. Sylvia showed resilience by driving her car into a river, which she later said was another suicide attempt, and later by taking another overdose of pills, from which she again recovered. For a person with an IQ of 160, this is some severe self-harm underachievement. Near the end, Sylvia wrote her one novel, The Bell Jar, which was not well received by critics upon its initial British publication in 1963. It was published under a pseudonym. The book is an extremely thinly veiled semi-autobiography of a young woman who gets a job in publishing but finds that unfulfilling, and wants to write a novel but can't decide with her limited life experience about what. So our protagonist decides to write a semi-autobiography of a young woman who gets a job in publishing but finds that unfulfilling, and wants to write a novel but can't decide with her limited life experience about what. So she decides, well, you get the idea. Most people never get a novel published, but Sylvia did on her first try, and she found this unfulfilling. A month later, this date in 1963, Sylvia wrote her last piece, a note with her doctor's phone number, which, owing to its brevity, could be interpreted as a cry for help, call the doctor, or just could have been a note she left out to remind herself to call the doctor. She then sealed up her kitchen, turned on her gas stove, stuck her head in the oven, and this time managed to end it. There was some later speculation that this was intended as a cry for help without intent to follow through, but investigating police thought it was pretty cut and dry, what with her head that far in the oven, that she meant it. Plath quickly became a feminist icon with additional claims that Hughes drove her to suicide. Hughes' awful behavior didn't help, of course, but it's unclear that he or anyone could have helped, even if he weren't awful. Some people continue to believe he murdered Plath, but in fact he was too busy living with his mistress at the time and was nowhere near her. Plath fans have repeatedly defaced her gravestone by trying to scratch her husband's name off of it. The Bell Jar wasn't published in the United States until 1971 over the objections of her mother and of Hughes, who thought it was too obviously autobiographical and painted her family in a bad light. But it was also lucrative, which is probably also why Hughes eventually allowed publication even of poems that described him as a brute. The Bell Jar has since become a go-to favorite of morose, bookish young people. Sylvia was awarded a Pulitzer Prize for a 1981 collection of her poetry posthumously, and posthumously is just as well as she likely would have found the award unfulfilling. Some cheery postscripts. Hughes' mistress was pregnant with his child when Plath committed suicide. In 1969, the mistress killed herself and her young daughter, both by taking an overdose of sleeping pills and by turning on the gas on the kitchen stove. Both of them. That, friends, is an example of overachievement. Hughes and Plath's son took after his grandfather by becoming a biology academic, specializing in fish, it so happens, and then took after his mother by hanging himself in Alaska in 2009. The couple's surviving daughter writes and judges poetry, why not? No one said life is a meritocracy, and has published several children's books, as there's apparently a market for reading Sylvia Plath's surviving daughter's children's stories to your kids at bedtime. The first book is titled Getting Rid of Aunt Edna, or in some publications, simply Getting Rid of Edna. I'm not making that up. Look it up for yourself. If anyone should have ideas about how to get rid of Aunt Edna, huh? Be sure to like this video and subscribe to the channel for more Today in Horrible History. Remember that after a brief visit, the rest of your day can only seem better in comparison.
Life is a nightmare. Man, that's the way it seems. Life is a nightmare.